welcome. You're watching the special edition of the India Revival Mission with me, Poonam Burde. 6 months after the lockdown, where does India's economy stand? India is opening up. The country is walking the tightrope to ensure that the health of the people and that of the economy both are in good shape. Are we on the right track as far as the economic revival is concerned? From a historic GDP contraction in Q1 to some green shoots that are now emerging, have we really recovered from that shock? And if not, then how far are we from it? We'll try and find those answers to those questions through this broadcast. Sanjeev, Sanyal, Principal Economic Advisor, is with us on the broadcast to find some answers to those questions. Adhikari, Managing Director of Governance Now, is also with us. So are economists Dr. Santosh Mehrotra and Professor Arun Kumar. Sanjeev, Sanyal, my first question is to you. Over the last couple of weeks, we've seen ratings agencies, several of them who have upgraded India's outlook. We've seen multiple of them come out and see the green shoots that are now emerging in the Indian economy.
You're right. I mean, we did go through a contraction, not surprisingly, because we had imposed a lockdown for health reasons. When we imposed the lockdown, we were aware there will be an impact on GDP growth, but it is a choice we had to make. But since then, we have systematically opened the economy up, and we have seen wherever we have opened the economy up, economic activity come back. We have also simultaneously done a ramping up of demand side measures. Now, we had many sort of observers had commented that we had not been ramping up demand during the lockdown. Well, as we have explained repeatedly, it was meaningless to press on the accelerator when when our foot was firmly on the brake. So at that stage in April, May, June, July, we had focused basically on creating a safety net. So our focus then was keeping the MSME sector alive through the cycle, providing the world's largest food program, 800 million people being provided food, providing money through the Jan Dhan system. But now our tack has changed. We are now focusing not on ramping up demand. So if you look at what the Honorable Finance Minister has been announcing in recent weeks, you can see we are giving incentives to firms to create formal employment. We have provided the PLI scheme to begin to encourage investment, particularly in export-oriented sectors and so on. So our tack is beginning to change. We are now beginning, as green shoots appear, our strategy is to ramp up that momentum into the next months.
Right, Dr. Mehrotra, we've just had the RBI governor also come out and say that the bounce back of the Indian economy has been faster than expected. There are several signs that do show green shoots, like Sanjeev Sanyal was mentioning. But do you think it's too early to judge?
Yes, it's too early to tell. All prognostications are that we will contract by roughly 10%. We don't even know whether we are going to be in positive territory in FY22. Look, the bottom line is, there were 4 problems with the way the lockdown was imposed. 1, it was sudden, 4 hours notice. For that reason, it was unplanned. Only 3 weeks later, on the 15th of April, we got some notification of some rules. 3rd, it was national in scope, as opposed to being confined to where the international flights were coming in, which is what the source of the pandemic was. And 4, it was, by the Oxford metric, the most stringent lockdown of any country in the world. By contrast, in China, which is a less democratic country than ours, the lockdown was not national. It was confined to Wuhan city and to Hubei province, which is where the pandemic broke. They didn't block all flights to all cities or all trains to all cities. They just blocked transportation between Hubei province and the rest of the country. And what told us to have the stringent lockdown? The consequences are there for all of us to see. We are having the worst contraction in the economy of all G20 countries. We are going to suffer a contraction this year of 10.4% by World Economic Outlook prognostications, and the world is suffering a contraction of only 4.4. None of the countries of Europe or Japan or USA is suffering a contraction like this, and none of the BRICS countries are. What does that tell you? that our lockdown was poorly planned, sudden, and national in reach unnecessarily so, and because we didn't put in place the fiscal package. And final point, we are being told repeatedly about this brake and accelerator contradiction. For someone who works in the Ministry of Finance, they should know that when you decide to make an expenditure, which you could have decided in May itself, the actual flow of expenditure into the economy, the fiscal stimulus would begin only reaching the people 3 months later. I'm not talking about food, the systems are in place.
Right.
This is standard practice that it takes 3 to 4 months for money to flow. And because the fiscal stimulus has been too little, too late, it's been delayed, the economy is gone into a severer contraction and will continue in a contraction because capacity is closing down. Would you believe in the non-agricultural sector? In industry, the capacity is at 58.6%.
Right.
Never in our history.
Right, Mr. Sanyal. So even though there are some positive signs, the criticism is that even though there have been 3 stimulus packages, several measures that have been taken up by the centre as far as providing relief goes, it may have been too little too late. Also because as per data, it shows that among the 24 most promising or the 24 major economies, India is likely to suffer the most.
So absolutely, I would like to comment on this. First of all, there are a lot of pious comments in there, with not taking into account the fact that, of course, when you do a lockdown, which was necessary for health reasons, there will be a slowdown in the economy. That is only to be expected. And since then, we have opened it up, and the green shoots that are appearing are happening now. Nevertheless, let us have a public bet here. The gentleman just mentioned that he is not even sure that there will be positive GDP growth in financial year 2022. So let me say that we are more than likely to have a very sharp acceleration in 2022. And I'm quite happy to reappear a year from now on the same debate with the same panelists and have a discussion about that. Because I think these numbers are just bandied about. But supposing those numbers do turn out to be very significantly sharper, then I would like to have this debate again and point this out.
Professor Arun Kumar, there are several factors that can be looked into, like the unemployment rate has gone down, GST collections are up. There are several positives to look at, even though, yes, we did suffer from a jolt. We did see a historic contraction there, but we are growing. What do you think should be, the factors, the sectors really, which should be now factored in by the government? Which are the sectors you think should now the focus be on?
So just stepping back a little, I agree that lockdown was essential. But as Santosh has pointed out, it was very sudden and the unorganized sector got very badly affected. And in our quarterly data, the unorganized sector is not taken into account separately. It is assumed that, it's growing at the same rate as the organized sector. So in the Q1, the decline in the economy was not 23.9%, but more like 40% because the unorganized sector completely stopped. And the unorganized sector is the one that is finding it difficult to revive, because these are small, people with small amount of capital, and their capital got exhausted when the industry and their businesses closed down. And they are the ones who are still continuing to be hit very badly. Second point is that what does lockdown mean? It means a cessation of economic activity. And therefore, both supply and demand get affected. So at the moment, our supplies are affected and the demand is also affected. And that's why the revival is there. As is expected, because when you ease down, certainly things will improve. When you open industry, when you open businesses, certainly it's better than what it was in April and May. But the question is, how much better is it? And that is where I still think that the economy is still 20% down compared to last year. So, if you think about it, what will happen next year? Of course, because the base is low, there'll be a very sharp upward expansion. But that doesn't mean it will recover back to where it was in 2019. And that is where I think large number of experts believe that it may take 1 to 2 years for the economy to recover. The next point I want to make is that many of the agencies which are giving data that the improvement is better than was expected, they are not independent data collecting agencies. They depend on the government data itself, and the government data itself is flawed because the unorganized sector is not really being factored into our calculations. So the employment situation and many other factors are still very poorly, reflected. Then the services sector, where, you have people in contact with each other, That's where the problem is, whether it's travel, tourism, trade, education, health, etc., etc. So very large number of sectors, and let us remember that the services sector is 55% of GDP, and if that doesn't recover well, then the rate of growth will remain, low, and it will remain low compared to the GDP of last year, even next year. So therefore, we have to be very cautious that, the unorganized sector needs to be revived,
right.
and, employment needs to be revived, and, unless employment and the unorganized sector revive, the demand will remain poor. And then we are headed into another, severe wave, like in Europe and America. That will mean the exports will be affected, and also in the Indian economy, because we can have more lockdowns and more, disruptions because of the rising numbers of cases that are taking place.
Right.
Therefore, we have to be very cautious. We cannot really say that we are out of the woods. That may take at least another year. The vaccines may come, say, by January, February, but by the time the average population gets it, will be July, August. So we are talking about at least 8-9 months before, we can see some kind of normalcy, So I think we have to be very, very careful.
Right, it's interesting that you mention European nations, that you mention UK, the United States, because a lot of these countries have now gone back into the lockdown mode, seeing the spike in the number of cases. We've seen in India as well, Mr. Adhikari, that there are several curbs in place. Can we afford to move towards another lockdown? Is it something that is financially viable for a country that is still trying to struggle and recover from the jolt that it received a couple of months ago?
I believe, Poonam, that second lockdown would not be so economically feasible for India. Even the fact that the first lockdown led to a contraction of 24% in the GDP. Now, one thing that we need to understand is that with the unlocking happening, yes, there was a time where unlocking had to happen, and because of which the demand is also penting up. As for the economic revival, demand is a very essential feature. And we being a resilient economy, when 1.5 billion people come together and demand for various products and services, that's where green shoots are visible. But as far as your question goes regarding the second lockdown, you can have stringent SOPs, you can have stringent measures in order to curb the spread of infection, but having a lockdown as previous would not be so economically feasible for India, because that will take us way, way, way back.
Right, Sanjeev, Sanyal, would you like to weigh in? There is talk of a lockdown. It is on the minds of the common man as well, especially of smaller businesses, because barring agriculture, all other sectors did witness a sharp fall as far as productivity goes in the Q1 of this year. 8 core sectors are still in the red. They have been gradually picking up, yes, but they're still in the negative zone.
Of course, if you have to go into a lockdown, you have to expect there to be an impact. So to say that there was an impact is just pious repeating of the fact. Of course, those who called for the lockdown were fully aware that there will be an impact on the economy, there will be impact on the unorganized sector. To make these pious statements as if we have just discovered afterwards that there will be an impact is just disingenuous. These lockdowns had to be done. Very reluctantly they were done, but because of health reasons, which were repeatedly being explained by the government. Now the question is, what do we do about it? Now, obviously, we are still not in a position to completely open things up, and the Honorable Prime Minister has been on television continuously stating that we need to remain vigilant, using masks and so on, so that we don't have a big second wave. I mean, we've had one in Delhi, so it can clearly show you what can happen. And of course, the experience of the Europe and the US and other places as well, where there have been second round flare-ups. So this is something we have to be careful about. Nonetheless, step by step, carefully, we are opening the economy up. We are slowly but steadily adding in demand measures to accelerate the economy.
Right.
But as we have to be vigilant. And yes, meanwhile, we have not wasted time. We have continued to do supply side measures. There have been huge opening up of all kinds of sectors, whether removing telecom regulations on the BPO sector,
right,
or doing labor reforms or agriculture reforms. Many difficult reforms have gotten done. So I think there are many good things that are getting done. And I think this pious repeating, oh, the unorganized sector, the government is unaware. I'm afraid we are fully aware of this. There are many, many measures of keeping track of unorganized sector, and they do get reflected in the numbers. Please go and look at the statistical methodologies. They do take it into account. There is no such assumption as that this, it just happens to move up and down along with the rest of the economy. There is obviously a link, but we do take these things into account in multiple ways. And there are a large number of indicators that are now available. They do not have been there historically. Like, for example, the Apple and Google Mobility Index.
Right.
We have almost real-time data on electricity production, on railway freight movement, and all kinds of other real-time data that give us a sense that things have bottomed out, and in some sectors they have gone up.
Dr. Mehrotra, like Sanjeev Sanyal was mentioning, India is opening up. Yes, of course, it is required. It's the norm now for economic revival. Now, the government has been pretty liberal about expanding as far as FDI goes. Do you think that is something that can be explored?
Well, one is hopeful that now performance-linked incentive has been put in place for about 12 sectors. There might be some FDI coming in. But if you don't mind, Poonam, may I ask two questions of Mr. Sanyal? If we are going to contract in 1920 by 10%, then do we not have to grow by at least 10% in 21-22 to get back to at least 1920 GDP levels? However, never in the history of our country in real terms have we grown at 10%. And second question, why is the contraction of the Indian economy the worst in this year as compared to any other G20 country or the world or any of the richer countries?
So let me answer those questions since it's been directed at me. We did carry out during the April to June quarter the world's most stringent lockdown, which was done for health reasons, and it is not surprisingly that we did also consequently see a very significant contraction of our economy during that quarter. However, we are now beginning to see the acceleration happening, and at a time where many other countries may have to go into lockdown, we are hoping to avoid having to do that. So I think our acceleration will be sustained. As far as getting a economy growing at 10% in 21-22, let me point out that you will say when those numbers turn out that, oh, it's because of a low base. But remember, all forecasters have already taken that low base into account. So do not tell me when a year from now that, oh, the high growth rate, it is above 10% because of a low base. Please do not come back and tell me, because you already know the low base. So statistically, you are going to get very high growth rates. And yes, you will begin to see GDP growth, barring another pandemic or some natural disaster of some sort, going back perhaps to significantly above 1920 numbers by a year's time. So I am quite confident that we will see the growth, economic growth accelerating. But anyway, since he had originally made the statement that we will have negative growth in 21-22, let me point out that negative growth is negative growth after taking into account the low base of this year. So when you make a statement, please clearly state what you mean. Otherwise, making generic platitudes, statements is not something you should be doing as a professional.
Right, quick closing comment from all gentlemen, Dr. Mehrotra and Professor Arun Kumar. I'll come to you as well. But Dr. Mehrotra, what is it that you expect from the central government from here on for the economic revival in the country?
Well, thankfully, the government is now getting on to the right track. However, too much time has been lost. I think there is no choice but to put in place an urban Manrega. Unfortunately, the government has rejected that idea. Secondly, there is need for a minimum income guarantee, only 500 rupees per month for most of our poor if we want to revive demand. In both cases, urban Manrega and a minimum income guarantee for 60% of our country's population will substitute PM Kisan. So it will not cause much more expenditure. I can prove that. And urban Manrega will be substitutive of rural Manrega. So it will not lead to too much of an expansion of the fiscal stimulus, fiscal deficit. We need an increase in the fiscal deficit. There is no getting away from that. It has to be used effectively. And we hope that this idea that the infrastructure pipeline projects are put in place, the investments are put in place as quickly as possible.
Right.
Mr. Sanyal, however, never answered my question. Why was the contraction in our economy in this year the worst of any other country in the G20?
Well, unfortunately, I cannot get in a word from Mr. Sanyal on that. I'm running out of time. Professor Arun Kumar, quick 30 seconds, closing remarks. What exactly is that you want the government to do from here on?
So first thing is that we know that the budget was planned with a plus 10% nominal growth, whereas now the decline would be at least 20% in nominal terms. And a 30% turnaround in the budget data, so tax collection will be far less, expenditures will be more, the fiscal deficit will shoot up, Already I expect the fiscal deficit to go above 20% of GDP if you take the center plus the states plus the, off-balance sheet items and other items, So it's a very high fiscal deficit that's already assured. The budget needs to be reformulated, otherwise expenditures on COVID and other things will be difficult to manage, So that's the first thing. Second thing is that MSME sector is what is being catered to, but they're the micro sector, which is 6 crore units. They are the ones who are left out. It's the small and the medium units that the policy is for. So for the very small micro sector, there has to be a targeted policy because they are the biggest employers after agriculture. So as Santosh has said, an urban guarantee scheme is very essential,
Right.
and so other things also very necessary. Next is testing and tracing. Testing has gone down, and if we don't do testing and tracing, then the disease will spread and we'll not be able to reopen the economy well. Finally, instead of supply side items that the government is pushing, it
Right.
needs to push demand. Supply side is creating huge political, turmoil, the farmers, the labor, etc. Our attention is getting focused away from dealing with the COVID to dealing with, various kinds of political, this thing. So I think our focus should be entirely at this point on demand creation, and supply side can wait because investment will not revive unless capacity utilization goes up. FDI will also not come very much unless capacity utilization is better. So I think we are, barking up the wrong tree by going for supply side responses rather than demand side.
Right. Right. I'm sure the government is taking note of all these factors. We are, of course, looking to open up the economy so that the revival of the economy is faster. Shaktikanta Das has already come out and said that it is faster than expected. I thank all gentlemen. It's not all gloom and doom. There is some silver lining in this dark cloud. India is, of course, on the right track.